The movie begins in the year 2563, 300 years after Earth's colossal war, with the United Republic of Mars known as the Fall. Amidst a sprawling scrapyard, Dr. Dyson Ito is searching through debris when he stumbles upon the remnants of a cyborg girl. Remarkably, her head and core are still functional and her human brain is alive. Recognizing the rarity of this technology, Dr. Ito is intrigued, and he transports her to his clinic, intent on restoring her to life. In his workshop, he and his assistant meticulously attach her head to a beautifully crafted body. The following day, the cyborg girl regains consciousness and is astonished by her new form. She marvels at her exquisitely designed doll-like body and quickly masters control over it. Then she sneaks up on Ito and his assistant while they are busy at work. Noticing her, Ito expresses his delight at seeing her fully operational. Then he introduces himself and his assistant nurse to the cyborg girl, and after that he offers her an orange to check her taste receptors, which are working perfectly fine. She inquires if they have any information about her past. As she has no memories of her previous life, Ito explains that they are just as in the dark. To lift her spirits, Ito then takes her to explore the city. As they walk through the streets, the girl is captivated by the sight of a magnificent city floating in the sky. Ito explains that this city is called Zalem, the last of the great sky cities to survive the war, and the place they are in is known as Iron City. The cyborg girl asks Ito to give her a name. He names her Alita.
Alita.
I love it! Can we keep it? At least until I can remember my real name?
Suddenly, Alita's attention is captured by a screen broadcasting a brutal cyborg sport. Ito identifies it as motorball and advises her not to get distracted by it. Just then she saw a wanted poster, announcing a bounty for the perpetrator of 6 women's murders. Her examination is cut short by the lumbering presence of a large robot, known as a Centurion. Instinctively, Alita adopts a defensive stance. However, she is quickly pulled aside by a passing young man. The young man, impressed by her agility, takes a moment to realize that she is a cyborg. As Dr. Ito returns, interrupting their interaction, the young man promises to meet Alita again and hastily departs. Curious, Alita asks about him and Ito reveals his name is Hugo. Later that evening, somewhere in the city, a woman is about to enter her apartment when she is suddenly attacked by someone. At that exact moment, Alita wakes up to her scream, and outside of her bedroom she spots Ito sneaking back into the house, carrying a large suitcase with blood in his hand. The next day, Alita assists Dr. Ito and his assistant in repairing a man who was robbed last night by thugs for his cyborg parts, and he also mentions that a woman was murdered last night. Right there, Alita notices a wound on Dr. Ito's arm and begins to suspect his involvement in the crime. As she walks out of Dr. Ito's house, Alita is stopped by a woman with a distinctive mark on her forehead. The woman named Shirin, she boldly grabs Alita's arm, examining it closely. Shirin is revealed to be Ito's ex-wife, and she is here to convince Dr. Ito to work with them to build cyborgs for Motorball, hoping it might allow them to return to Zalem. Ito refuses, insisting that there is no way back to Zalem.
I won't help you build monsters.
On the other side, Alita links up with Hugo and his friends and decides to join their informal motorball game. On her first attempt, she makes some mistakes. As Hugo's friends Tanji make fun of her, this time Alita doesn't fall for their trap and scores her first goal. After that, while they are returning, Hugo buys her some chocolate and she instantly falls in love with the taste.
That's so great! I have a favorite food now.
Just then, a bounty hunter named Zapan walks by. Hugo reveals that Zapan is hunting his target, and Alita can't help but notice how cool Zapan's sword is. In the evening, Alita tries to sneak back home, but Dr. Ito catches her and warns her about the threats roaming outside. The next day, Hugo takes Alita to his secret spot, atop a high building providing a clear view of Zalem, and he shares that it's his dream to go to Zalem one day. Later that evening, Alita notices Dr. Ito sneaking out of the house. This time, she decides to follow him to discover what he is up to. From a distance, she watches as Dr. Ito tracks a girl. He opens his suitcase and begins to assemble a big rocket hammer. Just as he is about to strike, Alita stops him, mistakenly thinking he's the murderer of the wanted poster mentioned. But it turns out to be an ambush by the cyborg criminals responsible for the recent murders. At this moment, Alita learns that Dr. Ito is a hunter warrior and he was trying to protect the girl. Dr. Ito urges Alita to hide while he confronts the cyborgs alone, but all of them together weigh heavily on Dr. Ito. Then suddenly, Alita jumps into the fray with extraordinary martial skills and immediately eliminates one attacker. And also, despite being unarmed, Alita proves nearly invincible to her opponent due to her superior fighting fighting skills and reflexes. Then a huge cyborg named Gruishka joins the fight. While Alita fighting with him, she sees a flashback of herself fighting on the moon alongside warriors like her. Then she finishes the kick by chopping off his arm. Realizing he has no chance against this little girl, Gruishka escapes into the underground part of the city. Dr. Ito praises Alita's martial arts skills, and together they head to the Hunter Warriors headquarters to collect the bounty for the eliminated cyborg criminals.
Bounty for the cyborg Nisyana was 20,000 credits.
Alita accuses Dr. Ito of withholding information about her past. In response, Ito takes her back to the lab and reveals that the body he gave her was originally intended for his deceased daughter, after whom he named her. Dr. Ito also reveals that a cyborg he had built for Motorball came to his clinic seeking drugs, and during the encounter the cyborg knocked Ito down, but his daughter couldn't get out of his way fast enough. This tragedy spurred Ito to become a hunter warrior. Although he hunted down the murderer, but he did not find peace, so he continued his hunting career. Dr. Ito then scans Alita and reveals that her heart is made from a technology lost over 300 years ago, and her heart is strong enough to power the entire Iron City for years. On the other side, Gruishka crashes through the window of Chiron's bedroom and begs for help. Initially, Chiron is reluctant to help him, but upon learning that Alita is responsible for his condition, she changes her mind. In Vector's lab, Chiron is working with Gruishka. There she found a wired chip in Gruishka's head and suspects someone in Zalem is controlling him. But their conversation is interrupted by Nova, who connects to Gruishka. Upon learning that Alita caused Gruishka's damage, Nova demands they upgrade Gruishka so he can kill Alita and retrieve her core. After that, Nova possesses Vector's body and promises Chiron a place in Zalem if she can meet his demand. On the other side, Dr. Ito and Alita can't find Gruishka's name in Hunter Warriors Wanted database, so Dr. Ito concludes that someone powerful from Zalem is protecting Gruishka. Upon hearing this, Alita expresses her desire to become a hunter warrior, but Dr. Ito denies it, as he doesn't want her to become involved in violence. Frustrated by his response, Alita runs off, and then she meets up with Hugo to watch the motorball. As they head to the arena, the match starts and Alita watches excitedly as the cyborgs fiercely compete for the ball. Meanwhile, Hugo takes the opportunity to show her around. From a distance, they spot Vector and Sharon. Hugo explains that Vector essentially controls the motorball. Back in the match, one of the cyborgs uses his grind cutters to devastate his opponents and wins the match. However, Vector is not pleased with the outcome, so he decides to acquire Kinuba's grind cutters, which he plans to use to upgrade Gruishka. Moments later, Hugo's friends rush over and inform him they need to leave. This evening, Kinuba is celebrating his victory with girls. When he is suddenly attacked by a group of masked men, they overpower him and cut his grind cutters. Vector arrives at the scene. Just as one of the masked men reveals himself to be Hugo, Vector rewards him for his successful heist and pays him. After the group departs, Vector eliminates Kinuba. The next day, Alita follows Hugo and his friends to a location outside the city. They share a brief history of the war. They take her to a lake where a spaceship has crashed. Suddenly, Alita points out the command deck of the ship, then dives into the lake and makes her way to the ship. The ship activates in response to Alita's presence. Inside, Alita enters a command that deactivates the power shield, revealing a high-tech cyborg body. She retrieves the body and returns to her friends. Back in the city, Alita takes the body to Dr. Ito's lab and insists that he attach her to it. Dr. Ito refuses, explaining that the body is known as a berserker, highly advanced technology that is extremely powerful and potentially dangerous if not properly controlled.
The instinctive fighting technique you use is Panzerkunst, a lost combat art for machine bodies. It was used by the berserkers. You are not just a warrior, Alita. You're an berserker.
Frustrated by his refusal, Alita storms out. Determined, Alita heads to the Hunter Warriors headquarters and registers as a Hunter Warrior. After her registration, she visits the Hunter Warriors hangout spot with Hugo. Once inside, she observes Zapan beating up some guys. After that, he skeptically makes fun of her in front of everyone, remarking that such a cute girl isn't tough enough to call herself a bounty hunter. But Alita addresses the hunters asking for their help in defeating Gruishka with a motivational speech. However, she receives no support and Zapan laughs at her efforts. In response, Alita roasts Zapan, prompting laughter from the other Hunter Warriors. Unable to tolerate the humiliation, Zapan attacks Alita, who easily overpowers him without breaking a sweat. Emboldened, Alita challenges the warriors to a fight, declaring that if she wins, they must help her. Seconds later, a fight breaks out, and Alita dominates the battle against all the patrons of the bar. As she gains the upper hand over the warriors, Dr. Ito arrives and the fight stops. At this moment, the monstrous cyborg Gruishka arrives, looking noticeably upgraded. He declares his intent to capture Alita and demonstrates the power of his new grind cutters by killing one of the warriors. But a little dog that had befriended Alita stands up to Gruishka, barking defiantly at him, but Gruishka mercilessly kills the dog. Alita, fueled by rage, uses the dog's blood as war paint on her face. When Gruishka tries to strike her, she skillfully dodges. Then he uses his grind cutters to break the floor, creating an opening to his domain beneath the city. Without hesitation, Alita leaps down after him, and a fierce battle unfolds underground. Alita fights with precision and finesse, showcasing her extraordinary skills. However, Gruishka's relentless assault eventually finds its mark, and his grind cutters slice through her body. In this critical moment, Alita experiences a flashback of her training, where her coach reveals that Nova is the real enemy. Refusing to surrender, Alita musters her remaining strength. With her only functioning hand, she leaps at Gruishka and manages to gouge out his eye, leaving her arm stuck in his eye socket. Just then, Dr. Ito, Hugo, and a dog master arrive and help fend off Gruishka. Dr. Ito quickly carries the injured Alita back to the lab. Left with no other options, Dr. Ito and his assistant attach Alita to the berserker body. The body begins making micro-adjustments autonomously. Later on, Alita wakes Ito with a kiss and demonstrates the capabilities of her new body. Her new form is significantly faster and stronger, and she can now generate arc plasma to use as a weapon. Alita then meets up with Hugo to show off her new body. Hugo is thrilled to see her up and active again, and he remarks that she now appears more mature with her new physique. As they leave, Alita mentions that her new body is more powerful and has enhanced touch sensitivity. Hugo gently touches her and then they share a kiss. Back in Vector's lab, Gruishka is furious over the loss of his eye and his failure to eliminate Alita. Nova, possessing Vector's body, scolds Gruishka for his failure, telling him that his only chance for redemption is to bring him Alita's heart. After regaining consciousness, Vector tells Shuren that he can't rely solely on Gruishka's success and that he needs to develop his own plan. After this, Vector invites Hugo for a drink to set up Alita. It turns out that Vector had once promised Hugo a passage to Zalem in exchange for doing his dirty work and paying him a fixed sum of money. He manipulates Hugo into persuading Alita to try motorball. The next day, Alita visits Hugo and finds him asleep and hungover. Hugo wakes up and explains that he was out drinking with Vector, who reiterated the promise to take him to Zalem if he could gather the rest of the money needed. Upon realizing how important this is to him, Alita dramatically offers her heart, urging Hugo to sell it so he can gather enough money for both of them to go to Zalem. Hugo refuses and advises her never to give up things so precious, no matter the reason.
Got an microreactor for a power supply, probably worth millions.
Afterwards, they head out together, and Hugo reveals another potential way to make money. Vector wants Alita to compete in motorball, and if she wins, they could advance to the senior league and make a substantial amount. Alita agrees, but only if Hugo coaches her. Determined to help Hugo, Alita enters the motorball tournament. Dr. Ito equips her with all the necessary gear. As he helps her suit up, he also urges her to focus on the game and not to destroy her body, as he might not be able to repair this technology. After they part ways, she writes 99 on her suit, recalling the number from her memory. In another locker room, Vector gathers the cyborgs he has hired to compete against Alita. He promises a substantial sum of money to anyone who can eliminate her. Before the tournament begins, Alita calls Hugo to ask why he hasn't shown up yet.
I'm doing this for us, remember? You can't miss it.
He tells her he needs to handle something but will be there soon. Meanwhile, Hugo meets Tanji, who is in the middle of stripping a cyborg for parts. Hugo calls him by his real name, which angers Tanji. Hugo declares his intention to quit their illicit activities, but Tanji reacts poorly, insulting Alita. Their argument quickly escalates into a fight. During the scuffle, Zapan arrives and confronts Hugo, taunting him about Alita's reaction. He vows revenge on Hugo for Alita's earlier interference and decides to frame him for murder. Zapan kills the cyborg Tanji with stripping and blames Hugo. As he prepares to execute Hugo, Tanji intervenes and Zapan cuts him in half. In desperation, Hugo throws a firebomb at Zapan and flees. Zapan, undeterred, begins to track him relentlessly. Back in the arena, Alita positions herself at the starting line. Just seconds before the match begins, Dr. Ito spots several bounty hunters among the competitors and realizes the match is a setup. He warns Alita just in time.
It's a setup. You gotta get out of there. They're gonna kill you.
Which ones?
All of them!
But she decides to compete anyway. As the match kicks off, the cyborgs immediately target Alita. She skillfully takes them out one by one, displaying remarkable fighting skills. Amidst the chaos, the cyborgs also turn on each other to capture their prey. The commentator praises her, calling her an angel with a body built for battle. During the match, Hugo calls her in a panic. He reveals that Zapan is hunting him, intent on executing him. Alita instructs him to make his way to a specific location, where she will meet him. After the call, Alita breaks out of the arena by crashing through a billboard. The pursuing cyborgs catch up and momentarily restrain her, but she fights back fiercely, managing to free herself and methodically take out her attackers. Meanwhile, Zapan finally catches Hugo, and just as he is about to execute him, Alita arrives in the nick of time and saves Hugo. At that moment, Alita sees Hugo's wanted mugshot displayed on a nearby billboard. Zapan reveals Hugo's misdeeds, and Hugo admits that while he has not been completely honest with Alita, he has never committed murder. When Zapan picks up his sword and orders Alita to step aside, Alita threatens to kill him if he touches Hugo. Zapan reminds her that interfering with a hunter-warrior and his target is a crime, so Alita declares he's mine. Before she can act, Zapan stabs Hugo with his sword, leaving Alita horrified. At the same time, a centurion arrives demanding they hand over the criminal Hugo. Alita carries him into a nearby building, pleading with him not to die. Hugo says that if she gets out with him alive, they will kill them both. Here they share a final kiss, observed from a distance by Shuren. Moved by their love, Shuren deceives Vector, approaching Alita and Hugo and revealing there's a way to save Hugo. Moments later, Alita emerges with Hugo's head in her hand. The Centurions at the scene confirm the kill. Zapan, suspicious, checks if Hugo is truly dead and discovers that Alita is keeping his brain alive with her own heart's power. Zapan attempts to seize the head, but the Centurions accuse him of trying to steal another hunter's kill.
Violation. Hunter-warrior Zapan, stealing another's bounty is against factory law and the hunter's code.
Hearing this, Alita takes Zapan's sword and slashes half of his face with it.
Face! My face!
Back in Dr. Ito's lab, he manages to save Hugo, attaching him to a new cyborg body. He credits Charon's perfect surgical technique for saving Hugo's life without causing brain damage. Dr. Ito tells Alita that no one can buy their way to Zalem, it's just a lie by Vector. He reveals that the only way to reach Zalem is to become the motorball champion. He also says that Iron City is monitored and controlled by Nova. Meanwhile, Vector confronts Shuren. After learning that she helped Hugo and Alita, Shuren confesses that she couldn't proceed with their plan, because she too is a mother. She informs Vector of her desire to quit. As Shuren walks away, she is confronted by Gruishka. On the other side, fierce Alita heads to Vector's factory. As she enters the building, several Centurions block her path. Generating arc plasma, she powers her sword and swiftly destroys all the Centurions.
Violation. Violate partially.
She breaks into Vector's office and confronts him for lying to Hugo about sending him to Zalem. Vector opens a case, revealing various body parts of Shuren. At that moment, Gruishka appears and strikes Alita with his grind cutter. This attack triggers a flashback for Alita, taking her back to the war with Zalem. She sees her colleagues annihilated by a defense ring on the transport tube. Her commander urges her to complete the mission and destroy Zalem. Snapping back to reality, Alita rises to her feet. As her body repairs itself, she declares that she knows her real enemy and Gruishka is just a puppet. When Gruishka launches his grind cutters at her again, she effortlessly slices them in half with her blade. In a split second, she bisects Gruishka without any effort. After defeating Gruishka, Alita demands that Nova speak to her through Vector's body. Nova replies possessing Vector. He commends her for exceeding his expectations by defeating Gruishka and turning Shuren against him. However, Nova then threatens to eliminate Dr. Ito and Hugo if he can't get to her. Unable to tolerate his threats, Alita drives her sword into Vector's body, eliminating him. Just then Dr. Ito calls. He informs Alita that factory enforcers were searching for Hugo, but he helped him escape and now Hugo is attempting to climb the tube to Zalem. Alita rushes after him. She catches up with Hugo on the tube and she begs him to come back with her, but Hugo insists that his place is in Zalem. When he finally agrees, Nova activates the tube's defense system. Hugo attempts to jump, but the blades destroy his cyborg body. Alita grabs him to prevent his fall, but his hand slowly detaches. With his last words, Hugo thanks Alita for everything, then he falls to his death. Several months later, Alita is preparing for a motorball race. The commentator introduces her as the new motorball star, who has ascended to the Champion League in just a few months. She enters the arena to chant her name from the crowd. In a defiant gesture, Alita raises her sword towards Zalem, while Nova watches her from his city.